Welcome to this last parsha of the book of Genesis, vaY'chi, referring to the passing of Jacob, our patriarch, and also Joseph ultimately. And it's got a lot of poetry in it, which makes it quite challenging in terms of translation. But the first part of it is straightforward narrative, and we will look at that right now. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So let's see. Here we go. So what's interesting, of course, is you notice this parsha starts on verse 28. Now, the chapters and verses were actually put in by Christian scholars, but they were adopted, as you can see, by Jewish scholars. So this is a new parsha, and yet it comes as part of the previous parsha, just a continuation.
I thought Jews did the verses and Christians
Yes,
did the
it's true. I
chapters.
was thinking, Judith, I think you're absolutely right. I'm talking about, because of course the Tamei Mikra put that in. What I meant was the verse numbering. Thank you, though, for that, just putting a little bit of clarity on that. Yes, the verse numbering is what I'm talking about, not the verses themselves, which is another important issue. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. Sheva esrei shana, 17 years, right? Well, that number 17 is significant in a way, right? Because,
But Jacob was 17 when he was sold into slavery.
yeah, Joseph, right.
I mean, Joseph.
Right, I know, right. So since he
This
was
happens
17.
to me every time I go through Genesis. I start conflating the
Okay.
names.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm sure you're not the first and you won't be the last. It's certainly easy to do that. After all, we're also told that Jacob and Joseph had very parallel lives on a whole bunch of levels. So anyway, what's sort of interesting is that he actually experienced, right, Joseph, 34 years total. I actually did elsewhere a little table. I just didn't write it in this, but I can give it to you. And if you have a pencil and you want to write it down, working backwards, Jacob was 147 years. He lived 147 years. And if you subtract 17 from that, you realize that he was 130. And in fact, he tells Pharaoh he was 130 when he comes before Pharaoh. So when he came down to Egypt, he was 130. He was 128 when the famine started. And how do you get that? Because 7 from 130 isn't exactly 128. There is a tradition that the famine ended after 2 years when Jacob arrived. That Jacob, that the effect of that tzaddik coming down there had the effect of ending the famine after only 2 years. So he was 128 when the famine started, and he was 121 when the good years started, and he was 108 when Joseph was sold, and he was 91 when Joseph was born. 91 years old when Joseph was born. So he was actually only nine. He was 9 years later, or maybe after Abraham. He was 9 years earlier than Abraham when Isaac was born. Interestingly enough, just some interesting chronology. I didn't go any further back than that. Okay, sorry. Going on. Vayhi Yemei Yaakov, the days of Jacob, Shnei Chayav, the years of his life, Shiva Shanim, 7 years, V'arba'im u'me'at shana, and 140 years. That's how old he was. Rashi. Vayehi Yaakov, Jacob lived. Lama Parsha Zo Stuma, why is this Parsha, this new Parsha, it doesn't come with any breaks. We know there are paragraphs in the Torah, right? In the Sefer Torah, there are two types of paragraphs, but there's no paragraphing here. It just goes straight on. And not only that, if I am not mistaken, if you take your tikkun and look for paragraphing in this particular parsha, I believe you will not find too many, if any. Possibly before the last chapter, but there's basically there's no paragraphing. Why? Lefi shekevan sheniftar Yaakov Avinu, because since Jacob, our patriarch, passed away, nistamu einehem velibam shel Yisrael, the eyes and the hearts of Israel became stopped up. They were stopped up. So we got stuma. They weren't living out spiritually, right? As profoundly as they had prior to his passing. Why? Mitzarat hashibud, from the trouble, the anguish of the enslavement, shehitchilu l'shabdam, because they began to enslave them. Davar acher, another interpretation, shebikesh liglot et haketz, that Jacob wanted to reveal to them end of time, the end, all the final, or the end, that's simply what it means, levanav, to his sons, venistam mimenu, and it was, he wasn't able to. It was stopped up, or he forgot it, he just couldn't do it. The Bereshit Rabbah, these are all in Bereshit Rabbah. Now, the fact is that these answers just to me, beg questions. At least certainly the second one begs a question, which of course is that simple three-letter question. Why? Interesting. So we have to ponder on that. Why? First of all, on some levels, it's not the right thing to do. That for some reason, I'm going to assume a divine reason, that was not something that Jacob was given the ability to do, and that on some levels he had to keep it a secret. I've often, pondered the question of, immortality, because we don't have necessarily any evidence of it, at least empirically. And I think to myself, the best I can come to on that level is what is called, I believe, from mathematics, a reductio ad absurdum. In other words, you assume that it were possible and ask, well, what would be the consequences? And my sense is that enduring the adversity of life, enduring the pain of life is very, very important. It's very much part of the development of our souls. And it's possible that if we knew for sure that there was a future to us beyond the grave, we might want to shorten our lives. And that's not something, we know that from within Jewish tradition, that is, that's a no-no.
I'm going to live
So
forever.
there we go. Well, on some levels, please God, we do. We do. So, but there are lots
What's your
of
plan, though? What's your plan,
whose plan? Lisa's or mine?
Lisa?
If you're talking about being able to live with and overcome adversity, that's what my joy is also about, is that having that much fullness, that much of everything, those infinite possibilities. I believe in infinite possibilities. So that also is my belief in that there is almost no death or no real separation. We could talk about that for the rest of our lives. Maybe we will.
Well, it's one of the certainties. The two certainties are death and taxes. And facing that certainty is so important, I think.
Except death and taxes, excuse me.
Yeah.
It's so hard when you believe in something that is so, it's energy.
Transcendent.
Yeah, then there is no death.
Right. We're talking about mortality is what we're talking about here. That
But I guess
we
there,
don't stay in this world forever. We don't.
I guess there's a cultural belief that excludes mortality and taxes, maybe even too.
I think
It's
there's more irony to taxes than there is to the other than the mortality part of it. At any rate, I don't want to
I
get
love
yeah,
the way, for me, it connects with the Shema, because for me, Adonai, Yud He Vav He is infinite possibilities. So this is just one of those conversations that hopefully we'll be having for the rest of our mortal lives.
there we go.
Together.
I mean, I frankly, if I again scripting one's life, right? We sort of had a conversation about that, you know. But if part of my future time beyond the grave is singing in the divine choir, I'd look forward to that.
Ooh,
Singing in
I'm
the divine-
harmony.
Maybe they'll
exactly.
want you on clarinet as well.
I wouldn't mind that either. Thanks, Lauren. Let's get back into our subject quickly. Okay. That's it. All right. But it's sort of interesting, right? I mean, he wanted to let them know. And yes, we can definitely play around with it, but asking ourselves, why did he want to let them know about the end of time? And what does that say in terms of, first of all, where he'd arrived himself? Because I believe he knew it. He knew what the Kates was. He just didn't want to, well, he wanted to give them reassurance and stuff like that. And for some reason, that was not the right thing. Look, one of the models of life within Judaism, and certainly based on Abraham's experience, is that this life is a grand test. That we are being tested in this life. We're given a lot of resources, and we're consequently tested. And that's how we gain merit. That's how we get a sense of worth, is at how we encounter these tests and what we learn from these tests. Let's keep going.
Can I ask, what exactly do you mean when how do you understand the word et haketz?
Well, it could mean several things. It could mean the end of the enslavement, right? Kates hashibud. But I think when you sort of talk about the Kates, you're talking about end time, right? Something about that's how I understand it. It's a
In the
great question.
context, but in the context of the Tanakh and in Rashi's worldview, is there such a thing?
Yes, yes. Oh yeah,
So God actually puts in parentheses end of the exile.
yeah. But then again, yes. When it says the end of the exile, it's talking about what exile, right? Because after all, the experience in Egypt is actually a precursor of the ultimate experience of the Jewish people,
Hmm.
being thrown into exile, ultimately by the Romans in the year 70. So, but I still think, that, it's again, the Chabad position is certainly done from a place of knowledge and having studied. Let's keep going. Vayikravu Yemei Yisrael Lamut, and the days of Israel, Jacob, in other words, drew near for him to die. Vayikra livno liYosef, and he called his son to Joseph. Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Imna matzati chen be'enecha, if please I have found favor in your eyes. Simna yadcha tachat yerechi, place your hand under my thigh. Va'asita imadi chesed ve'emet, and perform for me an act of loving kindness or true loving kindness. Al not tikbareni b'Mitzrayim. Do not bury me in Egypt. Do not allow me to be buried in Egypt. So we've had this Simnaya Chatachat Yerechi. Do you remember the previous time that happened?
When they
That
were
we had?
wrestling.
No.
No.
No. I'm talking
No, when
about using
Eliezer was going to get
correct. Correct. Yes, that's right.
What? Go say it.
When Abraham asked his servant to put his
Oh, yeah.
hand under his, So it is a form of, as Rashi will tell us, it is the form of making an oath. Here we go. Vayikrevu Yemei Yisrael Lamut, the days of Israel came close to his passing, to die. And he says, this is from Bereshit Rabbah, this phrase, because it is, I mean, it's definitely a turn of phrase. Kol mi shenemar bo kriva lamut, anyone with whom who is referenced with this phrase, kriva lamut, drew near to die. Lo higia leme avotav, he did not reach the days of his fathers, or his father in this case. Yitzchak, so in parentheses it says, Yitzchak Chai Kaf Kuf Peit, Isaac lived to 180, but Yaakov Kuf Men Zion, and Jacob to 147. So this drawing, his days drew near to come near, to be closer. In other words, all his days were closer to each other than his father.
Mhm.
But David, and with David, Ne'emar, it says kriva. Okay, and again, with David, it also says that same expression. Aviv Chai Taf, says his father lived 400. That's what the Taf stands for. And this, obviously, we would be astounded. And it says Sfarim Acherim, other manuscripts, Pei Shanim. Pei is 80 years. Easier to believe. So his father died at 80, Vahu Chai Ayin, and he lived to 70 years. David did not live anything beyond 70 years. He was relatively young when he died, but he lived his lifespan. We're told, of course, right? I think it's Psalm 139. No, Psalm 90. That the span of our life is 70 years, by reason of strength 80. Vayikra livnod Yosef, and he called to his son, to Joseph. Now it has to tell us Joseph, obviously. But why Joseph? After all, who else was a very preeminent son of his? Judah. It could have said he called Judah, but it doesn't. It says he called Joseph. Why? Because he had to call the person who had the ability, had the capability, who had the power, the control to be able to do this. And he says, Simna yadcha, place your hand, vehishava, and swear. Chesed ve'emet. This is a good place where we get this concept, right? Where we talk about seeing that someone is buried is an act of true loving kindness, is chesed ve'emet. And this is the source, at least from Rashi, that we see this. Chesed she'osin im hametim. This is the principle. The loving kindness that one performs with the dead. Hu chesed shel emet, is a true act of loving kindness. She'eino mitzapeh letashlum gemul, because the person who does this has no expectation of reward. And that's why it's considered true loving kindness. The person we're doing this for is not in a place to reward us.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah, I know. It is a classic interpretation. Al na tikbareni b'Mitzrayim, do not bury me in Egypt. Why not? Why not? Sofa, in the end, lihiyot afara kinim. In the end, its earth will swarm with lice. Oh, and here we go. Umerachashim tachat gufi, and they will swarm underneath my body. V'she'ein okay. V'she'ein metei chutza la'aretz chayim, and those who die outside the land of Israel are resurrected, right? They do not get resurrected. Ella betzar gilgul mechilot. They only get resurrected through the agony, the pain of the Gilgul Mechilot is going through the tunnels. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. But that they have to sort of travel through these tunnels to get back to the land of Israel. Veshelo, and that's the second explanation. Veshelo ya'asuni Mitzrayim avodat elilim. And the third explanation is that the Egyptians shouldn't make him into an idol. So there is Torah Tamima on this, and I'll get a start on it because the Torah Tamima goes into these explanations a little bit more and perhaps can answer some of the questions, some of them. Unisatani mi Mitzrayim, right? Bear me out of Egypt, carry me out of Egypt. Amar Karna, Karna is the name of a rabbi, said Karna, Dvarim Bagav. He says there are words in its midst. And there's, as you can see, this little note here by Torah Tamima. He says, Ritzono lomar. What he means by this is, Yesh kan devarim mesutarim ba'inyan. So my understanding is listor is a contradiction, right? There are words that appear contradictory in this matter, in this matter, v'tzarich lasim lev lahem, and one has to pay attention to them. You have to think these things through. So I have to tell you, we'll see what exactly that is that's contradictory, but we'll keep going.
Mesutarim, couldn't Mesutarim also be from lahastir, like hidden things?
Yes, and I think that's probably a better translation, come to think of it. So yeah, but sometimes it says, maaseh listor. Have you heard that expression? I will say hidden. There's another word for hidden, right? Let's take a look. Stumim. Stumim would make more sense. Okay, but I'll say hidden.
Uh-huh.
And okay, Maaseh Listor comes about, they use that expression in the Talmud when they have a halacha, right? They give a halacha or they give a halachic opinion, and then they give you a story associated with that halachic opinion, and that story seems to contradict the halachic opinion. And they say, Maaseh, the story, Listor, and it's an exclamation, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in modern Hebrew, we also have stira, which means contradiction.
Yes, contradiction. That's why I translated it that way.
Yeah.
So it could be. There are some contradictory things. So, I can change this back, but let me leave it for now. And let's keep going. And look, maybe this is what he's going to say. Yodea haya Yaakov Avinu, Jacob our patriarch, knew shetzadik gamur haya, that he was a true tzaddik. He knew this. The im meitim shebachutz la'aretz chayim. This is the contradiction. Okay, this is the contradiction. And if the dead that are outside the land of Israel, chayim, experience resurrection. So I'm going to go put this back as contradictory. Okay, this is the contradiction. If the dead who are outside the land of Israel experience resurrection, lama hitriach et banav. Why did he put his children to this trouble? Mipnei, and the answer is mipnei shelo kibel alav tzarach mechilot, because he was not willing to accept upon himself the agony of traveling through these tunnels to the land of Israel. So in other words, it's true, they are resurrected, they do experience resurrection, the righteous amongst the people, and certainly righteous Jews, but they still have to go through these tunnels, which of course, I believe, of course, is some kind of metaphor. Again, something mystical to be thought through and possibly researched. So here again, Ritzono lomar, what he means to say, Afal pi shelo hayat tzarich liskot Lizchut Eretz Yisrael, that despite the fact that Jacob did not require the merit of the land of Israel, in other words, the land, okay, I'll keep going, Shehi Mechaperet, because the land of Israel itself acts as an atonement. Living in the land of Israel acts as an atonement. One of the reasons the land of Israel acts as an atonement, he's going to quote a pasuk, okay, to prove that. But the joke about how to make a small fortune in Israel. You've heard the joke.
No.
You start off with a big fortune.
Oh. Yeah.
And there are other statements that say, life is very challenging in Eretz Yisrael. You don't go to Eretz Yisrael for a life of comfort. There are all kinds of other, benefits, but don't expect it to be easy. And earning a livelihood in Israel is not easy. And now he's quoting citing the pasuk, Kamo shekatav, or katuv, as is written, introduces a pasuk, Parshat Ha'azinu, in Parsha Ha'azinu, in the book of Deuteronomy, Vechiper admato amor, and the land will atone for its people. So there we are. We have a pasuk that proves that the land of Israel itself acts as a kind of an atonement. And, I could spend some time about talking about how living in Israel, especially, when you're living with so many Jewish people around you, the life is different, and so you celebrate festivals that you might not celebrate outside the land of Israel. It's just, I'm sure Shira Beth could tell us, it's a very different kind of experience Jewishly. Mipnei shetzadik gamur haya, because he was a true tzaddik. So he did not need the atonement of the land of Israel. But nevertheless, lo ratza lehikaver b'chutz la'aretz. He did not want to be buried outside the land of Israel. Mipnei shelo kibel alav tsar gilgul nechilot, because he did not want to accept upon himself the agony of gilgul nechilot. I'll just use the Hebrew for the time being. And here we go. Sheba'im lazeh hatzadikim b'kvurim b'chutz la'aretz. Because that is something that even tzadikim have to endure, okay, that are hakvurim b'chutz la'aretz, who are buried outside the land of Israel. V'hainu, and now he explains this, she'atzmotehem, that their bones mitgalgalim al yedei mechilot ha'adama, that they have to literally roll by means of the tunnels that are in the earth, ad Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, v'chayim sham, and there they are resurrected. So, obviously to our modern minds, we have to sort of sort this thing out. As I said, I prefer to try and understand this more metaphorically than physically, that there's certain spiritual tunnels that you have to go through because of the spiritual quality of the land of Israel. And I'm not going to elaborate too much more than that for now.
Well, one modern question, and it's actually 10, so I guess
Right,
it's
I know.
gonna be
I see that.
portable, But
Yes, that's okay.
when you're talking about the atonement of the land of Israel and the spiritual advantages, I'm
Yeah.
wondering about the criminals and gangsters who live in Israel.
Yes.
And,
Well, and what is your question?
well, I mean, so do they get some kind of special
Oh,
atonement even if they don't atone?
no, they wouldn't. It's not an automatic atonement. What I think it's saying is that you do get a little bit of a break in the land of Israel, maybe a big break.
But it
There
can't
was a,
overcome any
yeah,
sin that's
but
kind of.
and the thing is this, I think there's even a greater price to pay when you act in a criminal way in the land of Israel, which is why it atones. You have to understand, justice, the administration of justice, is understood as an atonement, as an opportunity for atonement.
Mhm.
So on the one hand, yes, on the surface, you're being punished, but on the other hand, that punishment is allowing you to atone.
Mhm. And if it's not capital.
Right. Well, the capital itself atones, incidentally. Death atones for pretty much everything.
Mm.
I'm going to
Wow,
stop the share.
this has been such an eye opener. I have learned an amazing amount and opened up to wanting to share certain things about who I am and what I believe with you
Okay.
all.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording right now.